Hello, my name is Tim Smith, and I'm the Executive Director of Federal Programs for Muskogee County School District. I'm here to talk today about our district's application to the Georgia Department of Education about the American Rescue Plan funds we are receiving through the emergency relief funds from the United States Department of Education. So in our application, there are some things that we had to work through to submit to the state, and these are the overall categories that we'll walk through today. The first part is the assurances. There were 5 assurances that we, by submitting our application, we are saying we will ensure these things will take place. So we'll look at those 5 assurances. The overall priorities that were identified based on some data sources, which we'll talk about. And then basically where the money is intended to be spent. So the first area is the learning opportunity loss. We have to spend at least 20% of the funds on this category. The second area is use of funds in general, which they have some specific areas that can be expended for these funds. And then the implementation of preventive and mitigation strategies as we have returned to school. So we're going to talk through all of these categories. So some acronyms that you'll see throughout this presentation and in our plan. ESSER are the key. I'm not going to read through all of these, but ESSER are referring to the emergency relief funds we've received from Godot or the Georgia Department of Education. We've received 3 rounds of funds. The first one was the CARES Act, and then CSRA funds, and now we have moved to ARP, or the American Rescue Plan. So this third round of funds has been by far the largest amount of money we'll be receiving through these emergency relief funds. And so the state is requiring us to have a formal plan of what those expenditures are going to look like. Jumping into the 5 assurances. The first one, and I'm not going to read these verbatim, but the first one is basically we have to have a plan. It has to be publicly available, and we have to ensure that within that plan we are using the funds for the intended purposes. The second assurance is that we will periodically review the plan. We will get feedback from stakeholders, the community, and then as needed, make revisions to that plan. So we have to review the plan at least twice a year, and that will be the case over the next 3 years until the end of the spending window, which will be in September of 2024. The third assurance is that the revised plan will address aspects that are recommended by the CDC. So that is something that has been in the forefront of the district's perspective for a while, and will continue to be through these expenditures. Fourth assurance, if we had a plan which was developed prior to receiving these funds, which we did, we had to look at that plan and make sure that it addressed the required aspects of safety outlined by the CDC, and that it is periodically reviewed as well. So it's been grandfathered into this process for the American Rescue Plan. And the last assurance is that the plan is understandable. It's in a uniform format. It's provided to our stakeholders in a manner that can be understood, whether that means it's translated. It could be there's an alternative format needed. So we have to be attuned to those needs and make those adjustments as needed. So we had to identify overall priorities as far as where do we want to focus these funds, and how do we want to get them deployed to impacting students. So we had to identify data sources. And we determined that the best data source to use was comprehensive needs assessments our schools just did this past spring and early summer. So we looked at all of the needs assessments and the overarching needs that the schools identified for their campuses. And we saw some overarching things across schools. And these were really the top 3 things right here. So We need to reestablish an in-person climate to include academics, behavior, social, emotional, all of those categories. And then personalized learning was the second one. So, you know, what's the individual needs of our students, and how do we support those individualized needs? And then reestablish and increase family and employee engagement. So we've been used to being at home a lot more, and just the socialization of things and collaboration and teamwork and all those things. We need to get back in that groove and continue to move forward and strengthening those areas. So the three components of the application that we had to submit to Godot are these three areas: the learning opportunity loss, which addresses at least that minimum 20% that has to be spent. The use of funds, which is a variety of categories, which we'll look at in just a minute, and then prevention and mitigation strategies. So for learning opportunity loss, there's some things that we have been doing and will continue to do. And then, so looking at high frequency tutoring, that's something we have done for a while now through some state funds we received called the Instructional Extension Program grant. Schools are allocated money from that every year, and so they do after school tutoring. Occasionally school will implement Saturday programs, but that's all part of the high frequency tutoring approach. Something we're starting this year with these funds and will take place over the next 3 years is we've hired intervention teachers to work in schools. So elementary, middle, and high school all will benefit from these positions. These teachers are focused on our students of greatest need. So that could be in a variety of content areas, that can be for a variety of needs. And that may be where they pull them out in small groups, where the teacher goes into the regular classroom and just provides additional teaching support. So it just depends on the need of each school and the students they're serving. Summer programming. So we've always done summer school, but it's been more of a remediation focus. And this past summer, Dr. Lewis wanted us to shift to a broader perspective. You know, that we're not just here to remediate, we're here to also enrich and extend learning. So we have embarked on a new approach to where the summer learning experience is for any and all students. So there's a focus now of yes, there's still remediation where needed, but there's also, like I mentioned, the enrichment piece, extending that learning for those who are interested. And that was a need that was identified because of the pandemic, of not just learning, loss of learning time, but incomplete learning. The year did not finish 2 years ago when we went out in March. So those are things that we're trying to close those gaps that occurred for students. That will take place through these funds over the next 3 years. But Dr. Lewis would love to see that go on into the future indefinitely. That would be our approach for the summer programs. As far as virtual learning, we will continue this. We do high school credit recovery through a couple different formats. We purchase a program called Apex that students can recover high school credits, and also they have access to Georgia Virtual to do that as well. And then parent and family engagement, around that third need of just re-engaging the family. That needs to be a focus of ours over the next 3 years. We need to get back to the point as soon as we are able to have the parents back in the building and supporting the learning and just being involved like they used to be, and making that a strength and strengthen that over time. So things that mentioned, a couple of these things already. We also have supplemental resources. These would be programs like Achieve 3000, Lexia, the STAR Reading and Math that we do universal screening assessments to find out where students are with their learning. We have IXL Math. there's just a variety of resources that are used to support the different content areas that will target the learning opportunity loss, and we will continue implementing those programs. Also, multi-tiered system of support. So this is something that we have, this is a statewide initiative from Godot. We've been doing this for a couple of years in a smaller number of schools, and it is time to roll it out to all the schools and deepen that work into each school. So that is going to be something that will focus on learning opportunity loss. That is what MTSS is basically identifying tiers of support for students on an individual basis, individual level. So each student has their needs, and then meeting those needs through these different tiers. And then PBIS, that's something we've been doing for several years now, and we will continue to do that, but that focuses on, you know, just this is how we conduct ourselves as students at this school. This is how we support each other. This is how we interact with each other. This is how we display our integrity. So that's something we will continue, because we have to have those practices of civility and social activity that support student learning. We're also part of a Godot dyslexia pilot. Within that pilot, there's some additional resources needed to help the students who struggle with this. So this is something we will look at through these funds. Mentioned intervention teachers. We have academic coaches in pretty much all of our Title I schools. Those positions are there. They're not actually, at this point, they're not funded through these funds, but they are a strategy for targeting this learning opportunity loss. We're continuing to look at expanding out school-based health centers as much as we can, and that will target students in need to provide them the optimal conditions so they can be at school and participate in learning. And then we have Community Schools United and as well as the United Way partnership that's focused on family and community engagement in the schools. So that will be something we will continue on. The Community Schools United, that is something, or the community and schools, we have funded through Title I and our school improvement grants. But the United Way partnership, we're looking at funding through these ARP funds. So right now, tentatively, as I said, we have to revisit this plan at least twice a year. So these percentages will shift. And I do want to caution that these percentages are somewhat deceiving, because we had to identify percentages in the application, but there are things that overlap. So for instance, when we're talking about summer learning, yes, even though it's for all students, it is still going to benefit students from struggling subgroups, whether that may be students of poverty or students with disabilities or our English language learners. They will benefit from the summer learning. So there's things that overlap across the categories, but our biggest expenditure will be the 38% at this point for continuity of core staff and services. That's going to cover things such as just some of the salary challenges we have, salary and benefits. It is removing any need for furlough days that we had a couple years ago at this point. So it's helping us create a more stable staff and provide stability to our employees. 24% is right now what we're projected at for summer learning, which that is not the only thing targeted to learning loss, as we just looked at in the last couple slides. But just with the summer learning program, our projections have us over that 20% threshold that we have to meet. 18% expenditures aligning with federal laws. So in 2015, the education law changed from No Child Left Behind to the Every Student Succeeds Act, which is under ESEA, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. Under ESSA, we have the different funding sources: Title I, Title II, Title III, Title IV, our school improvement grants. And then also there's the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act for our students with disabilities. That's another federal grant. So these federal grants that we already have received over time and will continue to receive, we have allowable expenditures under those grants. So under the ARP, one of the categories is basically if it's allowable under these grants under ESSA, then it's allowable within the ARP grants as well. So some of those expenditures, it's about 18%. We're looking at some student technology, hardware, software, connectivity. So for example, last year we purchased hotspots for students who did not have internet access at home. We will continue providing that access, and this is a potential funding source for that expense. 9% is multiple categories, so mental health, at-risk populations, family engagement, the PPE, the masks, gloves, cleaning items, and then the assessments piece. So assessments, that's something that we are aware there's a lot of assessments, and we have looked at scaling some of that back where we can, but teachers have asked for an assessment bank where they can pull questions that are already created for their teacher-made assessments in their classroom, to where they can create assessments without having to develop their own questions in the answer sheets. So that's something we're looking at out of these funds. Mental health piece, there's a variety of things that we're looking at that would fall up under the MTSS supports that really are falling up under the expenditures aligning with federal laws up top. So there's, again, overlap there. So I don't want to get too hung up on the 9% only covering these areas, because there's things in the percentages above impacting these categories as well. So as far as at-risk student populations, we are allowed to provide supports for these groups. These are the groups that were identified by the state in the application. So we have low-income students, students with disabilities, racial and ethnic minorities, English learners, and homeless students. And so there are things that we are looking at putting into the budget that will support these populations. We can also spend in the area of CTAE. So it's primarily high school students. We do have middle school CTA programs, but the high school programs are where they get more robust and more expanded for students. So we have some things that we're looking at in that area. Continuity, of course, staff and services. I mentioned about it offsets our need to furlough or reduce employee salaries, which we had to do a couple of years ago. We've funded employee stipends out of these funds. For last year's employees gotten a $1,000 stipend, basically just for being employed in Muscogee County. And then this year we're looking at doing another $1,000 one from this funding source. The last one was from round 2 of the funds. Transportation operations, we have some needs there. Our videos on the video systems on the buses. So how those videos are recorded, it's a cloud-based system, and that's a cost, an expensive cost that we'll look at moving over to these funds so we can ensure the safety of our students, of our bus drivers, and then just some other needs there. We need to enhance. We need to improve our wash rack system where our buses go through and are cleaned. There's some needs there. We have other operational costs with all of our students having Chromebooks now. So this year, well, last year, our pre-K through second grade students had a device, but they, just to be honest, they were used devices while we were waiting on being able to get them new devices. And so this year, those new devices have come in. And so all students have a Chromebook, and with that becomes an increased need for ebooks for students to be able to access the books they need for learning. So we're including that in our request for these funds. We need some more art and PE equipment, and then Dr. Lewis wants to provide mini grants to our schools. So essentially, schools have an opportunity to request funds for specific needs they have for their student populations. So that information will be going out to schools once that is finalized. And then we have distance and remote learning. I already talked about connectivity a little bit. Devices, we are looking at upgrading or I don't want to say upgrading, refreshing teacher devices because it's time to do that. So we're looking at paying for those out of these funds. There's some other things there that I'm not going to read all of these, but just things that ongoing expenses we have that we do every year, but this will help us make sure that we get the ones in place that we need to get in place and even provide some additional ones that we haven't been able to do in the past. Always sanitization and disinfection of buildings and buses. That will always be a focus of these funds as well. Purchase to make sure we have gloves, masks, cleaning supplies on hand. And then smart panels for classrooms. So most classrooms now, except for the newer schools, have older smart boards that are old, out of date, and need upgrading. So it's time to refresh those. And so we're looking at purchasing smart panels for the classrooms that will improve technology for our students and create a more enriching learning experience for them. The mental and physical health piece. So this is where we have several things here that have been requested that really is going to be more than 9% of, more than a portion of that 9% that was identified on that percentage slide. But we've got requests for counseling needs, school nursing, therapeutic services, wraparound services, prevention and intervention specialists to support the MTSS work in schools. And MTSS doesn't just support academics, it also supports the behavior and social side of student needs as well. We can also spend in professional development, and so there's always professional development needs. Things are constantly changing, and it's not, we can't just put things into place and not provide development for people to understand what to do, how it's supposed to work. School meal needs, now that we're back open, we need more sanitizer stations for lunch lines, cashier shields to protect students and the employees. So those are things that we have included. Then there's supplemental learning. So we've talked about these things, but these are all categories that we're allowed to spend in. And the summer learning experience, the after-school tutoring, they will help in these areas. The additional pay reference here, this is regarding when we have after-school tutoring or summer programs. That is work that our employees are doing off contract. So it requires us to pay them additional pay to provide that service for our students. And then we get to the prevention and mitigation strategies. This has been our approach for over a year now. There's monthly, sometimes bi-weekly meetings with local medical panel. Dr. Lewis has been adamant about picking the brains of the medical panel and really letting their recommendations drive the decisions made around the health and safety of our students and employees. Because we are educators, we're not medical experts. So that's the purpose of that medical panel. There's monthly Department of Public Health meetings, weekly meetings with the school-based COVID liaison. So our Director of Risk Management meets with one person from each school that's designated as a liaison. They meet weekly to, she provides them updates on kind of where we are, what the cases are looking like, next steps. They have conversations around needs at the schools and that type of thing to keep both sides current on what's going on. Connect and chat meetings with parents have taken place, town hall meetings, and then there's community agency partnerships. And so at this point in time, those things will continue over time. And then strategies to reduce transmission of COVID. So mask recommendations and requirements. At this point in time, we're under a mask requirement that will change based on medical panel recommendation when things improve. So there's not a set date that we are under a mask mandate until X date. It's a fluid thing based on our circumstances that we're facing at the time. Physical distancing as much as possible. We know that that's not always possible, especially when we have all kids back in school now. But that is something that will still be a focus as much as possible. Hand washing, respiratory etiquette, just reminding kids and employees, when we cough, when we sneeze, we into the crook of the arm, covering it. Maintaining healthy, clean facilities, and then contact tracing when needed. So I know that principals are making decisions based on this contact tracing requirement. So for example, I was out in a school this week, and because of the number of kids going through the line to get breakfast, instead of eating in the cafeteria, they're taking their food out to their classroom so that if they have to go to where they're contact tracing, it makes that a much more manageable task during this period of time. So that is our presentation for the American Rescue Plan application. Our application has been sent to the state. We will review it at least twice a year. We will need community feedback. We have some community members, parents and community members who have provided interest in being in a smaller subgroup of people to provide some feedback on that as well. So if anyone is interested in being a part of that as well, please reach out to me. My email address is smith.timothy.s@muskogee.k12.ga.us. Again, my name is Tim Smith. I'm the Executive Director of Federal Programs, and my number is 706-748-2154 if you have any questions as well that you'd like to discuss. Thank you for your time.